Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hey, it's Drew, and in our continual effort to try to mix things up here at Renegade Thinkers Unite, I've got kind of a unique guest for you today. His name is Erik Huberman, and he is the CEO and founder of a ridiculously fast-growing agency based out in California. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about this conversation is that Erik and his crew promises an outsourced CMO. But he assures me that this is not a threat actually to CMOs, many of whom I know are listening to the show. And just as a reminder, if I haven't thanked you already, I will thank you at the beginning of the show for continuing to listen. And Erik and I are going to do our best to provide some sort of real thought starters on things that may or may not be obvious, but we're seeing out there as we'll call them tips, not mistakes, but opportunities for fine-tuning and improving marketing. So Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And first, let's just go back a little bit. You started this company how long ago?
A little over 5 years ago.
5 years ago. And in those 5 years, you've grown from, how many initial partners did you have when you founded the company?
No initial partners. It was independent, and then brought on, one of my first hires became my partner, but it's still two of us. So started Hawk Media January 2014, and then brought on a team of about 7 people initially. And now we're a little over 160 full-time people in 5 years.
So yeah, that's impressive growth by any standard, and particularly impressive in a climate where lots of clients are bringing their work in-house. So you hear a lot more about agencies closing their doors or consolidating, and not too many growing with that kind of pace. So, and one of the things that I think is interesting about your promise is this outsourced CMO. So let's, what do you guys mean by that?
Totally. It's the idea, and I think, frankly, it's funny. We've talked a lot about the retail apocalypse and all these different shifts in industries, including agency industry and all these companies closing their door. I actually don't think there's a problem in the retail industry or the agency industry. I think it's a problem with an antiquated way of doing things. And so just like any other industry, we're just going through a shift in the way things need to be serviced and the things that are expected by the client. And so we took more of a consulting approach to marketing than an agency approach. And what I mean by that is we're consultative. We actually go in and act as a strategy consultant on marketing, and then are able to execute and do all the things that agencies have done traditionally as well. But the way we were able to articulate that is using the term outsourced CMO, because what that was intended to connote is high-level marketing consultation, not just agency delivery. The term agency generally means a middleman, someone between buying media and someone that needs media, or between those end producers and the person that needs them. With us, we're not a middleman. We're doing it all here, and we're also advising along the way and running it for the company. So we consider ourselves more of an outsourced marketing department and CMO than we do an agency. And what that's intended to do is not actually displace or replace the internal team. It depends on the scale of the business. We work with SMBs through Fortune 100s. We're not replacing a Fortune 100 CMO. That's not the intent, nor is that a good idea. But what is very important to understand is when you're the CMO at a Fortune 100, the idea of understanding the landscape and what's going on in the ecosystem and understanding where it's innovating and what's changing, and not getting distracted by things that aren't worth it, like the promotion of VR the past few years that actually has had little to no adoption in terms of how much it should have and how much would actually mean something. Those kind of things that you need to navigate become very hard from an internal standpoint when you're inside a company, because you're not seeing what's happening with other companies. You might have a few conversations, you might read the news, but let's be real, by the time it's on the news, it's 6 months out of date already. So what we're able to provide is that forest from the trees look, because we actively manage marketing for 450 different companies, that we can go, yeah, that's all BS, but that's worth looking at. And we can be that navigator for companies. And so you actually mentioned a pretty key point, which is the idea of bringing it all in-house. One of my favorite talks about that was when the CMO of Pepsi preached about bringing all their marketing in-house and then launched that Kendall Jenner ad that, well done, Pepsi. And so I'm going to alienate that as apparently going forward, but
not going to be a client tomorrow. We're pretty
probably not, and that's okay. But I'm still happy to have the conversation. But honestly, in general, the idea of doing everything in-house or outsourcing everything are both ridiculous. There's benefits to both, and there's drawbacks to both. What we've done as a company, and the reason we've grown so fast, is listen to the things that are drawbacks on the agency side and try to fix them. So not being strategic, being greedy, being antiquated, not moving fast, costing too much, all these things, not being flexible, these things that we hear about agencies, like, why am I signing long-term contracts? Why am I paying for things I'm not using? So we created this a la carte month-to-month approach to it, where you're literally getting exactly what you need in that moment, and then everything's month-to-month, so it can change as fast as you need it to. That's been the offering that's more client-centric than most companies before us that are our competitors. That's allowed us to be the fastest growing marketing company in the country. But again, the intent is not to completely displace the idea of hiring in-house. It's to complement it in a way that's actually more beneficial to the client. And what we see is there's an SMB and funded company motivation to bring everything in-house because of an enterprise value motivation, but it's not necessarily what's best for the business in the long run from a profitability and revenue growth standpoint. And so doing things early on, the example I give is hiring a CMO early on is not cost effective. A new business cannot afford a $250,000 CMO. But getting someone, so what ends up happening is most companies hire some junior marketer 2 years out of college that frankly has never built a business, and the opportunity cost in that marketing is terrible. So what we've tried to create, instead of doing that, hire a fractional CMO to come in, and then as you're ready and ramp up and you're ready to actually get a true head of marketing, get that person, and our person can help them get up to speed with your company faster. And then as they grow, we can then just be that strategy consultant that's bringing them that outside perspective. And that's the relationship that we've seen over the life cycle of a company.
Okay. So, really what we're talking about is business size and in the need. And as a smaller company, you're just not going to be able to get that kind of expertise. So it makes sense you have no choice but to outsource it. Otherwise you dumb source it. Yeah. you get get a junior person that really doesn't have the vision or understanding.
And that's on the SMB side. And then on the later stage side, it's more about having that outside view, an outside perspective.
Right. And so let's talk about the outside perspective for a moment. I mean, you mentioned 450 marketing, companies that you guys are working with and have served. Let's sort of work our way through if you will, the top tips or the biggest mistakes, whichever you want to sort of go at. And let's just break them down one at a time and have a conversation about some of the things that you're seeing out there consistently are either missed opportunities or
no problem. Number one, because it's funny, I just had a great meeting with a Fortune 500 this morning that has very little CRM and, retargeting aspect to their business, which, so there's this idea of separating media and retargeting and CRM and automation and follow-up, and they're two completely separate different practices, but they complement each other. And the fact that they're not communicating, and this is very common in bigger businesses, small businesses generally understand the need to have that follow-up because they're so desperate to make that individual return work. They understand it. But when you get into bigger companies, a lot of them are behind on the idea of even using email marketing properly. And now we have SMS, which is finally something that's, using the statistics. The nice thing about email marketing is it hasn't declined over the past 10 years as far as statistically, the returns, the open rates, the conversion rates, everything. It's the exact same it was 10 years ago. So anything you read about, email marketing declines are just somebody trying to grab it's clickbait. They're either using false statistics or they just don't know what they're talking about, which is way too common in our industry. But we see just to clarify the number, we have 450 active clients. We've managed marketing for almost 2,000. And I can tell you across the board, when it comes to the digital side of the business, whether it's e-commerce, et cetera, 25% plus of revenue is driven through email marketing. That's a big number to ignore. And so using those statistics, the average open rate's about 15%. The average click-through rate in email is about 3%. Using SMS as a comparative, on SMS, the average open rate is 98% and the average click-through rate is 30%. So it is 10 times as effective. And so knowing that, not utilizing that, which it is a newer marketing thing, it takes time to get into that, is kind of crazy. Like it's something that people need to be doing. So that's number one, I'd say, is like, look at your email and SMS.
Right. So there's email, that's one. SMS is number two. And I just want to bring that one up because I was in a meeting with a large company. I don't believe it was a client, but we were discussing the notion of SMS, and there happened to be a lawyer in the room, and who was concerned about issues of law, legal issues. And even if you do, his point was, and it was interesting because this is where the chair that individual sits, even if you do everything right as a large company with SMS, and it's your customers, and if you have permission, you are still going to get sued. And I thought that was really fascinating.
So that was actually the case a year ago. That's actually what's shifted, is there's actually common law and direct guidelines on how to do SMS without getting sued. That was the case, but it's fun. Again, our industry is full of people that don't keep up with it. Back to the point of needing that outside counsel, that has actually changed. So the same Can't Spam Act that applies to email applies to SMS now. So you have to have certain opt-out abilities. You have to have certain opt-in abilities. But as long as you're covering yourself in that way, it is actually not opening yourself up to, I mean, you can sue for anything.
Right.
But
That's, I think the point though, and that's the key is, look, if you're a small business and the risks aren't that great and the opportunity is huge, you're more likely to take that thing. If you're a huge company and you're used to getting sued for anything, SMS is just another excuse, whether it's legal or not. And that was his point.
That's fair. But that's, you got to be really,
no, still here.
Sorry, it was a reminder, but so, and the thing I would say is we deal with this with our own company, with our clients. Be very careful when legal starts running your marketing team. That's an issue too.
There he is. All right, let's take a break. We'll come right back.
Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
Okay, we're back, and we were just talking about good old email as just a reliable workhorse in the business of marketing. Then we stepped up to SMS as having an incredible effectiveness in terms of its ability. Obviously, that plays out, I suspect, against all demographics, but particularly well against with the folks under 25. Let's talk. So those are two good reminders. What else you got?
Yeah, the biggest shift we're seeing right now is, so last year was the first time digital advertising outpaced traditional advertising in terms of spend. And so what that's done, because of the way digital marketing works, is pricing's increased. It's a supply-demand situation, and now the demand's really high, so it gets more expensive. And so what that means is, if you traditionally were using digital marketing for direct ROI, your ROI is declining. Like it's a fact of life. It's costing more money. It's going to have worse ROI. And so now you have to find ways to maximize your returns on your advertising more than people were doing before. The past 10 years, you've been able to do a lot of marketing on digital that had quick returns, that you could spend $10, make $100 in the month, and keep going, and it's an arbitrage game. That's getting more difficult to achieve. And so what we're finding is you have to find ways to increase your conversion rate of a customer from that advertising and increase your lifetime value of a customer so that they purchase more often on an ongoing basis.
Right.
One of the best ways to do that from a marketing perspective is to create owned content, branded content. So finding and creating content for your customer that's above and beyond a purchase decision. So what type of content would your customer be looking for to engage with that still fits your brand? The best example of this, the one that's done it better than anyone, is Red Bull. Like, they do content around music and extreme sports and jumping out of space. They're not selling energy drinks in their content. They're doing content that engages their audience, and knowing that it inherently created a multi-billion-dollar company on the content side as well, because they were able to do so well at nailing the type of content their audience wanted to see.
Let me pause you there for a second, because I think they're two different thoughts. I think there's one really interesting thought, which is ROI is declining in digital. And I've seen this across the board. And the irony is that a lot of brands are investing more and more and more in their tech stack to optimize that ROI, and with some success, but also they're investing millions in the mark stack, leaving no dollars for media, which is still crazy in my mind. But so that's one aspect of the thing that I think is interesting. The Red Bull example is unfair for any brand that's listening to this thing. And because it's owned by an eccentric German guy who loves all this stuff and built the brand on the essence of that idea. Now, I would say the takeaway there is, if you have the vision to build a brand around a concept of this notion of, wings and doing crazy stuff, then that's going to work great for you. And I think that's a great point to sort of, let's just stop for a second and talk about how few brands there are that actually are unique.
Yep. No.
That's one that's unique. And, one of the things that we really focus on here is all these tactics are great. And yes, they can do the job for you in the short term of acquiring customers.
Yes.
But what they don't do necessarily is differentiate your brand. What they don't do is necessarily help you build, something that helps you with the battle for employees, that help you retain. And so the interesting thing about the worlds that you and I live in, which are overlapping, but in some ways very different, is we spend 100% of our time thinking about brand and uniqueness, and whereas a lot of what people hire you to do is the media buying and the tactical stuff that's at the other end of that. And it's just interesting, right? Because no client's going to come to you and say, "Hey, give me a Red Bull," right? They're not in that space.
No. But what I would say is that's where your and my job comes in. And I think we both do, if objectively we both do a decent job of this, is going, I get that you want to run Facebook ads as an example. You need to start with a plan and a brand first, because, there's great examples of this. And the guys that work there are awesome, but you've got Honest Company, Dollar Shave Club, and many others like it that hit that low 9-figure revenue mark by doing this direct response digital marketing and then cap out and can't figure out more revenue streams. Because when you don't build a brand and an ethos to your product, you're just selling, you're a direct response. You're basically the modern version of an as seen on TV product if you're building it that way.
Ginsu knife, baby.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's in that, if you even look at Proactive with all their market saturation, they capped out in the high 9 figures. Great business, don't get me wrong. And they sold it to Nestle. They're very happy with it. They're great people, but that didn't, kind of like elevate past that point to be a brand that's longstanding, like a Coca-Cola or Red Bull. You want to compare the revenue numbers, the proof's in the pudding. Like that actually does, you've got Proactive, which solves the acne problem, which so many people deal with. The addressable market's got to be incredibly high, but they never built that overarching brand that caused people to jump into it, versus Coca-Cola or Red Bull is a great example. Like, you've got a health trend in the US that, like, Red Bull's got to be one of the most unhealthy things out there, but they're a multi-billion-dollar company. Same thing with Coca-Cola, same thing with a lot of these things. And a lot of it is they've built this brand that, like, people at a young age get into it and stick with it. And that's very hard to find these days. And if you look at what are the variables here that are different, it's they've built, as you said, a differentiated brand, and a brand above and beyond just like, this is a utility and this is what problem we're solving.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that is interesting to me to sort of just mix this conversation up is I've talked to a number of these digital unicorns that have made it to $1 billion,
Sure.
And what's so interesting is many of them, like Zoom, which we're using right now to record this podcast, have built those brands using outdoor, good old fashioned outdoor.
Oh, yeah.
And why? Because you can't, it's not annoying in your inbox. It's not annoying on your social feeds. And it's, frankly, you can't avoid it, but it also, now it happens. I think they had a nice promise too.
Yep.
Meet Happy is an excellent promise, and the product delivers. But I think that what part of the factor that some of those other brands that you're finding is there's a limit to how far digital can take you in many cases, because you need awareness. It's just a reality.
You just nailed like 5 different great points. So number one, when it comes to retail, just to take those statistics, only 20 to 25% of purchases are done online. The other 70-75% are still done in stores. So the idea of doing everything online from a marketing perspective kind of fits the same boat. Like, people are still in the real world. They're not all sitting behind the computer all day waiting for you to reach out to them. Like, don't get me wrong, digital has an opportunity to be more targeted and do certain things, but it doesn't make sense that everything should go there. Number two, with marketing, the reason outdoor has had a resurgence, and direct mail, by the way, is because everyone stopped using it because they thought digital was a new sexy thing. And now here's an opportunity for cheap cost per impression that's not being competed with. So hitting people in a way that they're not used to and letting this pendulum swing happen is super important too. Number three, understanding that if your company, your product or service isn't good enough that if you get in front of the right audience, it's not going to sell, you're screwed no matter what you do. So like, marketing's an enabler here, but like, you have to have something that people actually want. And so Zoom is a great example. And I've seen their ads all over airports. Like, it's something people need. So if I see the ad, it's another reminder that has to work. If that doesn't work for their business isn't going to be successful. And the last point, which you kind of jumped on, is good product. At the end of the day, marketers can do whatever they can do. If you don't have a good product, you're screwed. If you have a good product, you'll be fine. It's really what it comes down to. You can make a lot of mistakes and have a good product and you'll be great. You can do everything right, have a terrible product, and nothing's going to work. So good product is at the core of everything we do as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting place we can sort of stop for a second and then revisit that, because I have lots of thoughts on that when we come back. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and Erik and I are having this conversation. We just started talking about good product, bad product. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here, because it's interesting, we've been doing a lot of interviews lately for a lot of different companies that we're doing brand assignments with. And, you know, the question is, how far can we, as a strategic boutique, go in saying, hey, you know what, your product isn't good enough?
Sure.
And what's interesting is, and I've told my team, is there's no limit to what we can say there, because, as we've talked about, nothing like great marketing to kill a bad product. So the other part of it's not just that. One of the ways of disrupting with a new promise, and I'll give you a couple of examples of this, is by making a change either for the better, fixing a problem, or adding something new. So I had Jennifer Deutsch of Park Place Technologies, you know, not necessarily the most interesting category. They make servers. They're managed server farms and warranties. And the only thing that they figured out that what matters is it's all about uptime. So they had this promise, it's all about uptime, but when they went to market with this new promise, they also added an AI component that automatically figured out when a server was about to go down. So in other words, they could make this promise and had an additional product. A slightly different example is when I interviewed Dave Edelman from Aetna. You know, before they relaunched their campaign, you don't join us, we join you. They spent 6 months retraining their customer service team so they could actually deliver on a new promise. So exactly. I think, you know, for a lot of times I've seen CMOs not succeed because they sort of accepted the product or service that they had as what it was, and this is all you got. And if I were to sort of throw some advice out to them is, you know, as the CMO, given how little time that you have, you know, courage is your friend because lack of courage is going to be your doom. And when it comes to being courageous, that means saying, you know what, our product isn't good enough. Our product doesn't represent a vision that we can sort of tell a great story about. You mentioned Dollar Shave Club. What they had going for them was they were the first of their kind in that area. They were right as this notion of subscription. And so they had the product, and maybe what they found in addition to the marketing challenges, the limitations of just, there were only so many people that were going to buy.
So I worked closely with them for a long time, and that video created that company. That video actually
video. That's amazing.
Which is incredible. With a great value proposition, product was, I'd say, middle of the road, but that was part of the problem is their churn was not great. Right. Their acquisition after that video was saturated was really difficult to sell a client or sell a customer in a profitable way for a company that averaged $4 to $5 per client per month, because there were upsells and all that. It's really, really, really hard to do digitally. And, we talk about it all the time with our customers. Like we also have a venture arm. We do a lot of investing, and our best investment, we did a digital launch, got a little bit of feedback, and then went right for brick and mortar in terms of the products they're creating. And in their first year, it did almost 30 million in revenue, because Target and Walmart are still very good partners to a product company, which a lot of these digital companies are finding out, but it's taken them 4, 5, 6 years to make that decision, which a lot of times now they're starting all over again, trying to build the brand in retail, when they frankly, back to the statistics we use, cut off 75% of their potential revenue streams by not being in brick and mortar.
Yeah. And I can add a sort of corollary to that. I mean, it may seem hard to connect the dots, but the fact is that a lot of shopping is no different than the attendance at a trade show and going to events. And it was funny, I had Ann Loons on the show. The episode hasn't gone live yet, but she admitted on the show that when she first took the job at Adobe, she looked at all the money they were spending on events, and she said, wait, why are we doing this? This is crazy. This is a digital world. We should be spending all the money on digital. And then she went to a couple of events, and she said, I got that wrong.
Yep.
And if we had our friend Brian Kramer on the phone here, you go, well, that's because it's all about human to human, and physical interactions still matter.
It's funny you say that. So we host 30 events a year as a mostly digital marketing company. We host 30 events a year, one annual summit that Adobe is actually a sponsor for.
There you go.
And they were one of the easiest people to work with to get as a partner on it, because the in-person interaction can't be ignored. That doesn't mean digital is not valuable. It's just both. It's together. And that's what people get confused a lot, I think. And you made a point a few minutes ago that I think is really important to get into. As a marketing partner, how direct can you be about whether a product's good or not? And the way we always handle that is trying to be as objective as possible. We try not to be gatekeepers and be like, I don't like that product, so it's not good, because maybe I'm wrong. So instead, we'll market something and we'll check every box that traditionally works. We'll do the right ads. We'll target the right people. We'll set up the right funnels. We'll build everything right. And then at some point, we've checked every box and the product's still not selling. There's not many variables left other than people just don't want your product. And that's what we try to do, because frankly, I think it's a disservice to try to gauge that ahead of time unless we have an incredible amount of experience in exactly that product and go, no, we tried this exact product and nobody cares. But then timing is a factor too. So that's really hard to articulate without new data. But once we have a few months of testing, then we can actually discern whether people actually even care about the product or not.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, we actually take a bolder approach when we're doing our assessment, because it's part of the expectation when we do our discovery. And we're probably spending a lot more time as well, because the folks are coming to us and say, hey, our brand isn't right. Our architecture is wrong, our naming is wrong, we just know that our whole go-to-market strategy isn't quite holding together the way we want it to. And so what you want to make sure of in the research that we do is that you're finding the sort of the kernels of what is the essence of the brand, but also sort of where the shortcomings are or where the opportunities for upside. I mentioned the additional service. So it's interesting. We did some work with one company that when we talked to a bunch of their customers, and what we noticed was the customers that had the highest satisfaction had an additional, call it an analytics module, and the ones that didn't have it weren't happy. And so they were charging extra and for this a module that was in fact the single most easiest way for the customer to realize how much value they were getting out of the product. So that's an example of where said, you know what, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face there. You should just bundle that in there because that's your insurance policy. That is showing people the value of your organization.
Yep.
And so it's an interesting thing. And so it wasn't as much a product problem as it was a situation where, that they got, somebody called it bad profits, right? Probably Jim Collins, I think, talked about bad profits. And this is a case where sometimes there are. And this speaks back to the thing that you mentioned at the very beginning, the advantage of having someone on the outside who isn't beholden to you. And this one, the difference I think I love about sort of brand consulting versus agency work is, we're getting hired to be really honest and we don't care if we execute or not.
Well, you're not going to lose your job. You might lose your client, but you're not beholden to one client generally. And so you kind of said it, you can be bold. I'd rather tell a client something they don't want to hear and see long-term success than just hang on to a client that's not going to succeed.
Yeah, that never works.
We're in it for the long run and we have a reputation to maintain. So we just like you've been doing this for a long time. And so we don't want to just collect a check and do whatever they say they were going to do. We're going to push back and we're going to say things because the nice thing is, as mentioned, we have 450 clients. Our biggest clients, less than 2% of our revenue. So if we have to do the right thing, and that's actually one of our core values is do the right thing. And if we have to do that in spite of making the client happy, we will.
Okay. All right, we got a few minutes left and we got to pull this together with some real pearls so that the folks listening who are driving to work or walking to work or riding to work or whatever it is, or on their way home, it gets some really sort of crystal clear, sometimes I ask my guests 2 do's and a don't, 2 do's and 1 don't. And so maybe we'll take turns. You do your 2 do's and a don't, and I'll come up with 2 while you're doing your thing.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing, regardless of seniority in marketing, I see people glaze over is always remember that a marketing campaign takes 3 pieces: awareness, nurturing, trust, meaning creating new awareness for whatever it is you're selling so that you get top of the funnel, nurturing that awareness to a sale because people just convert once they're aware, and then building trust because 75% of people through an Edelman survey say that they won't buy a product from a company they don't inherently trust. So somehow building that trust and checking all 3 boxes in every campaign you do, or you will miss out. You kind of mentioned the tech stack side. That's only nurturing if you're building a tech stack. That's generally not building awareness. So you're maximizing your existing awareness, but you're not building any growth. So that's the nugget that I would say, on do's and don'ts. Make sure that you do all 3 of those and you don't miss one.
Yeah, and I can put those in a slightly different frame,
Sure.
and yeah, this notion of awareness and it mattering. Byron Sharp has written about this at length, how brands grow, and I've seen it more and more and more. And there's a sense, even in the B2B world, while the only people that matter are the few decision makers there. And what's so interesting is that you don't even get in the door if you haven't been heard of, right? You just don't, you're just invisible. And so you need more awareness than you think. In B2B, this is really true because there's now way more than this is like at an enterprise level. There's 10 plus people on the decision, and they come from all these different worlds. So it's a big challenge to build awareness, but it really matters. And building awareness is not as simple as just, spending a certain amount of money against a group of people. This is where you need to be artful in your communication, because let's face it, we're all bombarded. And so building awareness means A, doing something unique, B, doing it consistently in every single communication channel. And we really hammer this home. It's that there's got to be one idea, because otherwise it splinters. And what's so interesting is this is another sort of is the importance of consistency here is so underrated in the digital marketing world, because you can optimize for every little thing. Yep. And so you optimize for, say, response rate, and you might leave your brand behind. The problem with that is this: you get your committee together, your buying committee together. You have your CIO, your security guy, your lawyer guy, your procurement guy, maybe an operations person, maybe even an HR and some risk management. I mean, there's just this committee list keeps going on and on. And let's say you optimize for each of those individuals, and you say, well, the lawyer, they care about these the risk factors, and the security guy, well, he compares. And when they get together, if they don't feel a common story about, and they can't come to an agreement.
I love that metaphor. It's so true.
And so, so yes, awareness, but you build awareness through an artful message that is consistently delivered wherever you are doing it. And that sounds easy, but it's really not. And this is why there is still creativity and creative agencies like ours that can help you get to ideas that are big enough and a large enough tent, if you will, to come up with sub ideas that still bring the big message home. So when it works, it's just when you see it, and we've got some clients that are doing it in over and over again, different channels, slightly different expression against employees, customers, and prospects, and it's unbelievably effective, and it's ridiculously simple.
Yep.
So, all right. Any last words, Erik? It's been fun talking to you. Always Hey, great conversation. And to all of my listeners out there, I hope you found this interesting. And I know that you'll text me if you didn't, 917-679-8852. As always, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.